Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
Welcome to Parlour Tea. It's been a while, I feel like, since I've been on. It's been, what, 2 weeks?
You haven't been on? No kidding.
I'm bringing Sarah on. I'm not even going to give you a chance. I'm not even going to give you a chance to talk.
That's too bad.
Hi.
Hey. Hi. How are you?
Tired. You?
Yeah.
Tired is a good, yeah.
Been busy and fun because I never do anything, and we did. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hello.
So we ended up going to Universal, came back 4 days later. We ended up going to Salem, Massachusetts for the Witches'
By we,
Ball.
he doesn't mean we, FYI.
Well, next time. Anyway, but it was fun. So I'm excited that now we get a chance to talk about it, and it's going to be great. It's my favorite place on earth. So
me too. Me too.
Anyway, so as you guys may or may not know, we are talking about Salem, Massachusetts, and Sarah's going to give us a little bit of a
history lesson.
A quick history lesson.
A synopsis of the.
Oh.
We'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
Take it away, Sarah.
Salem, Massachusetts. We all know about it. If we've been there, you love it. It's a town that has become synonymous with Halloween, witches, these types of things, and there's good reason for it. The Salem witch trials were one of the most horrific, horrible, darkest chapters of American history. So, what happened in Salem, Massachusetts? So, let's go back, way back to 1692. At the time, we have Salem Village and Salem Town. Salem Town is what is present-day Salem, Massachusetts. Salem Village is what is present-day Danvers, next door. These two towns were very linked in terms of churches, people who living in either town interacting with each other, but there was a lot of strife in between these two towns. And one of the things that you have to remember is Salem is a huge, bustling city today. Back then, in 1692, Salem and Danvers were the frontier, middle of nowhere, wilderness. And it was by the Puritans. These Puritans were very extremely religious, to the point of religious fanaticism. And one of the most important people to them was their preacher, Samuel Parris. Now, Samuel Parris, to me, personally, is a big reason why the Salem witch trials happened in the first place. So in January of 1692, in Samuel Parris's home, his daughter, Elizabeth Betty Parris, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, start feeling ill. They start going into fits. They claim that they're being pinched and bitten, and they're seeing things, and they're crawling on the floor and doing all of these things that in this time you did not do at any age. The Puritan society was extremely strict. There were very regimented ways that you went about your life, and this went against all of them. So this is happening, and how do they fix this? Prayer. So after about a month of fasting and prayer and trying to figure out what is wrong with these girls, they have not improved at all. So this is when they call in a doctor, Dr. William Griggs. And it's William Griggs who first puts the words, or I should say puts the words out, that he believes that they are being affected by bewitchment. This is a bad thing in Salem, Massachusetts. This is in the house of the minister, Samuel Parris. And like I had just said, this was a extremely religious society. The Puritans were very strict. They lived and breathed by the Bible and by God. And one thing that's really
here, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly. That is the entire reason that they were even here, was for this pursuit of this like fervent religious practice. And you got to think, this is happening in Samuel Parris's house. He is the minister. So what is happening here is he is essentially being told the people that are living under your roof are being afflicted by the devil, by Satan. This is a big problem for Paris and for the community. This is their biggest fear come to life. The devil is now in Salem, Massachusetts.
Right, and especially in their preacher's home.
In the preacher's home, right.
So now it's like
all bets are off.
Exactly. So then it turns into this very fervent pursuit of how do we fix this? Where did this come from? How did the devil get into Salem? You have the servants of the Paris house, Tituba, a woman who came from South America, and her husband, who's been recorded in paperwork as just being referred to as John Indian. And there are lots of stories about Tituba, especially, a little bit of John Indian, but more so Tituba, about what practices did they bring into the Paris house. Were they teaching the girls witchcraft? Were they teaching them fortune telling? All of these types of things. There hasn't been any written proof that says that the girls learned anything from Tituba. It is known that they spent a lot of time with Tituba. She was essentially the parent figure. You had Samuel Paris, who was the I'm just going to say it, the crazy preacher who was constantly in this state of fire and brimstone preaching the sermon about the Puritan life and the devil and warding off evil. Tituba is who the girls learned from. This is who they spent the majority of their time with. So it was only to be expected that they would then turn to Tituba to see, is this where this came from? The neighbors of the Paris house also were in this, trying to figure out what happened. And at one point, one of their neighbors, Mary Sibley, went to Tituba and said, let's make a witch cake. Do you guys know what the witch cake is? So the witch cake was a sort of folk magic. And what it was, which you can see the irony here, that they're trying to, let's figure out who the witches are by using folk magic. The witch cake was a concoction of a type of flour, water, and human urine. And they believed that if they fed this to a dog, what happened to the dog would tell them where the witchcraft was coming from. There we go.
We have
now,
like apps and stuff now to like, you know.
Yes.
Right? So this obviously.
I just want to say real quick, you do not learn about that in the Black Apron Kitchen Witch class.
Witch cake.
Hi, Mother Mary. Hi, Rachel.
So obviously the witch cake does not work. It does not give them any results. And eventually they start going to the kids themselves. And I say kids plural, not just because it was the two of them, but as time goes on, more and more girls start to be afflicted by these torments. We have Betty Paris. We have his niece. Then it starts to go to their neighbors. We have 17-year-old Elizabeth Hubbard. We have Mercy Williams. We have Mercy Lewis. We have Mary Walcott. And then we have quite possibly the most famous one, Anne Putnam.
Hello.
Hey, Rachel. So time goes on. The girls start to get more and more afflicted. Their symptoms become more extreme. More extreme things start happening. And while the more extreme things are happening, of course, the paranoia is getting stronger. The devil is here. We don't know how to stop it. Now it's going into other households. As they start getting questioned, the pressure is on now. Where is the devil? Where did he come to you? What did he look like? What did he do? And the girls start naming names. The first three people that are named, Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. March 1st, 1692, they're examined at a meeting house. This is where Tituba confesses to witchcraft. And it is also where one of the things happens that I feel is a pivotal point in the Salem witch trials. They ask Tituba. Tituba had been speaking about how the devil came to her and they came with a book. She and the kids were saying he has a book. He wants us to sign the devil's book, sign ourselves over to him. And March 1st, 1692 is when they asked Tituba about the book. And they start asking her, what are the other names? What are the other names? Tituba can't answer who the names are, but they ask her how many other names were there. Tituba says 9. This is where I feel is a significant turning point in the Salem witch trials. If she had said, I don't know, and left it at that, we don't know where this would have gone. But the fact that she said 9 told everybody there are 9 people in our village that are working with the devil, and we don't know who it is. And this is really where things take the turn and make that descent into total paranoia, total chaos, total madness. Keeps going throughout the rest of the year. And that's one thing that people are kind of shocked about the Salem witch trials. We hear about all of these people dying. We hear about all of this chaos. The Salem witch trials lasted less than a year. Mm-hmm. Less than a year. The last executions were in September of 1692. So in between March and September of 1692, 19 men and women were hanged, 1 was pressed to death, and at least 5 people died in jail.
Pressing is what, I mean, they're all horrific, but the pressing, every time I read about that, I panic.
Yeah.
Every time I hear about this, that was 1692. Mm-hmm. And you're sitting there going,
still happening.
It's not much different than it is now.
I said that in a previous podcast too, that the spirit of the Inquisition lives on. It never goes away. It just changes who it targets, and it changes
who's the ringleader.
Yeah, but that I feel like the Inquisition itself is like an entity that just sort of haunts society.
Absolutely, because it was fueled by paranoia, by fear. Fear doesn't expire. Fear doesn't go away. It just changes shape. And also religious fanaticism. We've seen this throughout time. Yeah.
Yep.
So we have this religious fanaticism, and like I said, over the course of 1 year, we have all of these deaths. And one of the shocking things about the Salem witch trials was we have this, you hear a lot of people be like, oh, well, they just killed, these elderly women that were outcasts. One of the disturbing things, and one of the things that put them on even more, or put them on edge even more, was that the people that were being accused and the people that were being executed were a wide range of people, wide range of ages. Like I mentioned before, these were men and women. These were people that were destitute. These were people that also had very extensive estates. There was a former Salem preacher that was in Maine, and they went up and dragged him back to Salem for his trial, and he was murdered. We have children. We have very high-standing church members that in their 70s, they had lived this entire life of service to God and people. It didn't matter anymore. When you had this level of paranoia through the town, all it took was an accusation. All it took was a finger being pointed. And all of that was coming from this group of young girls.
But I also felt that it was also a form of jealousy. Like you had something, I want it, and I'm going to do this so I can get something from this. And that's also one of my thoughts about why this started. Why was it in that specific area? But it's not just there. It was other places across the country.
The Salem witch trials were not the first time that you had witchcraft accusations, that you had witchcraft trials in this country. In Europe, there were the extensive, horrific witchcraft trials in Europe that thousands and thousands and thousands of people were killed. But here, Salem was not the first.
No.
Connecticut. Yeah, so there were other instances of this.
That's what's interesting to me too, though, is that Connecticut, I can't. That was I think the first documented. Why is that not as popular as Salem?
Salem was unique in the sense that of how out of control it was.
Right.
Yeah.
And the factor, this was wildfire. This was complete out of control paranoia. There was a lot of factors that turned it essentially into this perfect storm. Unfortunately, in a lot of previous trials, you'll see things like the one doctor who stepped in and said, okay, let's look at this logically. Not long before the Salem witch trials, there was a case of witchcraft in Groton, Massachusetts. And if you read the documentation of that witchcraft case, it really is the doctor who stepped in and who I personally feel put that fire out before it became something huge. I had mentioned Samuel Parris earlier, and how I really truly feel that he is a huge part of how this happened. He was a fire and brimstone religious fanatic. Previous endeavors in his life he had failed miserably at. At the time of the Salem witch trials, he was on the verge of being booted out of Salem as their minister because there was a lot of controversy and a lot of drama going on, both with membership to the churches, questions about his pay rate and the things that he was being given as compensation. And there was an all-time low of church membership at that time. So his past of essentially not succeeding in multiple things that he had pursued in his life, now he's at this place in Salem, things are not going well for him, and now the devil is in his house. So he had a lot of motivation to go after this full force.
Yeah.
But do you feel that this was some way a way of scaring people to come over to the church because paganism was stronger? And why it wasn't?
Not really.
No.
Yeah.
No, these people came from Europe to create this community based in religion.
Well, those people probably wanted to still have freedom, but still be able to practice. They couldn't. They didn't.
I'm sure though that Samuel Parris had this idea in his head that he was going to solve the problem of the devil, and he was going to be this hero. All of the negativity in his past was going to be wiped out if he was able to save the new world from Satan.
Well, he's not forgotten. And he's not what he thought he was going to be remembered for.
Yeah. But I mean, you look at these people, I mentioned previously the wide variety of people that this man destroyed. We have Bridget Bishop. She was 60 years old. She was the first one to be tried and executed. She had previously been accused of witchcraft twice. And the charges were dropped. She was allowed to go about her life. Rebecca Nurse was 71 years old when she was hanged for witchcraft. She was an incredibly devout member of the church. She was considered one of these community pillars. And she was one of the people that when her sentencing came down, that changed everything. When Rebecca Nurse was sentenced to die, there was no turning back from this. It went too far. The line was crossed. We have Sarah Good. She was a homeless woman. She was a beggar. We have Elizabeth Howe. Oh, she was 46, by the way. We have Elizabeth Howe, who was in her late 50s. She was accused of affecting people's livestock, and that was her whole charge of witchcraft. We have Susanna Martin. She was 70 years old. She was a widow. Sarah Wilde was previously accused of wearing a silk scarf.
The scandal.
Don't do that. We have George Burroughs. George Burroughs was in his early 40s, and George Burroughs was the former minister of Salem, Massachusetts. He was referred to as the King of Hell during these trials. We have George Jacob Sr. He was in his early 70s. He was arrested along with his granddaughter. She was spared. She survived the trials. We have Martha Carrier, who was 38 years old. She had also been previously accused of witchcraft, and she was given the title of Queen of Hell.
That's my cousin.
That's my cousin. We have John Proctor, 60 years old, who was a very, very vocal opponent of these witchcraft trials. There was this very fevered, fanatic air, but they're in this fever pitch of paranoia that just completely enveloped this area. There were people who were still speaking out against it, and John Proctor was one of those people. We have John Willard, who was a former constable, and he was accused after refusing to arrest people that he believed were innocent. We have Martha Corey, an outspoken critic of the trials. Her husband, Giles Corey, was the one who was pressed to death.
Rachel, what do you mean by your mom? My mom. Rachel wrote, show it again. What does that mean, Rachel?
We related, Rachel.
Maybe.
While Rachel responds, we have Mary Easty.
Okay, we got it now.
Yeah. Oh, I got it.
There you go.
That was my nickname in high school, by the way.
And now you know your cousins.
Yeah. There you go.
Then we have Mary Easty, who was Rebecca Nurse's sister. Mary Parker, her age was unknown. She may have been arrested as a case of mistaken identity, but at that point, it didn't matter anymore. We have Alice Parker, age unknown. Anne Putiater, she was in her 70s. She was accused of killing 5 people. Wilmot Reed, who was in her 70s. Margaret Scott was a widow in her 70s. And Samuel Wardwell, who was 49. He was executed after recanting a forced confession. So here are the victims of the Salem witch trials. Some of them.
So it's a huge array of people, and I think people often forget there were some men in there as well.
Yes.
I always feel like as John, like there was some reason, some jealousy, something, but also when you think about it too, and going back to even Europe and all of the witch executions there, a lot of the people that were accused or executed or hunted down were the people that had knowledge. You know, when you're talking about midwives, you're talking about healers, you're talking about people who understood herbs and the earth and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think especially about the midwives, what do midwives know?
Everything.
Midwives know who the baby's daddy is.
Mm.
Midwives know a lot of things.
So
yeah.
With all of that going on and everything doing it, how did all of this end? And then what was the reason? And then let's discuss like your ideas on thoughts or the thoughts that I heard too on how this whole thing came about.
Well, there's a lot of reasons how it came about. I'm sorry, what was the first thing you had asked me?
Like what was the ending to this end to this?
The ending, in a nutshell, they went too far. They accused the governor's wife. And at this point, it had been going on long enough. There had been enough controversy. All of these people had been executed. There were still people wallowing in jail. And it got to the point where people were finally starting to be like, I don't know if we're right about this. We may have made a mistake. As time goes on, you'll read accounts of how the girls kept accusing people, but it did get to a point where people were just like, enough.
Enough, kids.
Enough is enough. They were not getting the recognition that they were used to. There was a point where one of the biggest things that, condemned a lot of people was this idea of spectral evidence. The belief that the people who were practicing witchcraft and these witches had the ability to appear, to have the ability to kind of disembody themselves and send a spirit to torment people. This was really controversial. There were people this was really a make or break point for some people. There were some people that totally bought it. Yes, absolutely. Of course the devil can do that. And of course his minions could do that. And then there were other people that were like, you know what? That's too much. And it got to be a point where after all of these people had lost their lives, after all of these people that are still wallowing in prison, after the girls started to really lose a lot of credibility, there was a point finally where people were like, you know what? Spectral evidence is not a thing. So you see, as quickly as it happened, you see this gradual decrease and this gradual lack of faith in these things that were so It was so encompassed their lives for almost a year. And then it got to the point where the governor's wife was accused. And that was really another of these turning points that you hear about in the trials, where it was just like, no, enough of this. We're not doing this anymore.
Right.
Then the court that was founded by them to hear these cases, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, that was disbanded, and then it just fizzled out.
It's like nothing to see here. We're just gonna.
Well, very much so, because after these trials happened, they wanted to erase this as much as possible. Printed documentation, books, publishing of things was stopped. Pamphlets were burned. That's why today, if you go to Salem, there's a lot of places that call themselves museums, but if you go there looking for artifacts, there is very little physical remnants of these trials, because they were very, very worried about this getting out. And for decades, centuries, there was this gradual removal of these things from public memory.
It didn't work.
I wonder what it does now for the energy of that town, because now it's known as Witch City. Everybody knows Witch City, Salem. What it does for that, if that's like kind of like a boomerang effect, where you have this thing that people tried to erase and tried to cover up. Now it's like, and I know that they weren't witches, but now it's the destination.
Well, you have a giant statue of a witch sitting on the property that was one of the judge's homes.
Yeah.
Take that. And another one of the judge's homes, that's one of the biggest tourist attractions in Salem.
Yeah.
Which that place isn't what people think it is.
Not at all. No. I can't tell you how many people's dreams again, Jay and I have crushed walking past there. Like, you know what the house is, right? And they're like, oh.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
But
yeah. So,
do you want to share all that for everybody, or no? You want to wait till next time?
Yeah, next time. Look it up, Google. I think that the energy of not you. The energy of the place, I think, is electric. I think it's a place that's
exactly the term I was going to use too. Yeah.
I think the place there has seen this, finger pointing and bull crap and this question mark. So what they did is they embraced it and love it and really just forged forward with this change of thought around something that was so devil or anti anything, and made it more accepting and loving.
But that's where spiritual. I struggle a little bit with it, because they weren't witches.
No.
Yeah.
And there was one.
And the other thing that you got to remember about the people involved in the trials, or in any way, if you lived there, if you were in that region at the time, you were involved one way or another.
Right.
If you weren't being accused, you could have been a juror. You were pointing fingers. You were living your life in this fear of, like I had mentioned previously, it just took an accusation. Yeah. And that was it. And these people, even if they, hypothetically, if one of them were arrested and they escaped or were released from jail, if they were accused, these people's lives were ruined.
Yeah.
After the Salem witch trials for decades, because if you were put in prison, you had to pay a fee to be staying in that prison, and that decimated people's lives. And if that didn't financially decimate your life, once you got out, the whispers and the words, people's lives were ruined from these trials.
You sit there and you have this thought about the Bible and how strict, and it says, "Thou shalt not judge, or yet you be judged." What is it? The end piece, whatever. But I get
judge
that.
Not lest ye be judged.
Something. But I just don't understand how people in life become the judge, the jury, and the hammer.
Well,
I just don't
this
get.
Past weekend, we had a big witch festival in Keyport, And there was a man out in front of our store offering salvation to all of us.
Yay. We made it.
Yeah. So it's still there. Not
Oh,
to
yeah.
the extent in some ways. I don't.
But you know
religious fanaticism, brainwashing, cult behavior.
Mhm.
Oh, we know about that.
Fueled by fear. It has never. It's always been there, and it just comes out now in different ways than it did.
Changes colors.
Mhm.
Anyway,
So I think the other part of it too is that aside from the fact that these were really horrifically tragic deaths, right? There's a lot of unfinished business. There's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of sadness with that. There's also that energy of that fear and the uncertainty of not just the trials themselves, but the whole cultural, a pin could drop and you're now a witch.
right.
So that
You had a
has to be,
birthmark, or you had some.
yeah, that's got to have like an echo effect in that area.
Absolutely. Your every move was watched. And if your every move wasn't being watched by your neighbors and your family and your peers, your every move was being watched by God. I mean, these Puritans had this way of thinking about religion and their life that it was a very odd kind of cause and effect way that they looked at it. If something terrible happened, it wasn't, well, let's look at the reasons. If something terrible happened, it was because God was mad, and it was obviously supernatural. We look back at these things now, and we're like, how dumb were they to think that it was the devil and Satan? This threat of evil and Satan and the devil coming in, to these people, that was as real as the clothing that they were wearing. Yeah. They didn't think of this as a oh, maybe we're skeptical. Could it have been? Flat out, it was part of their life.
I mean, even like the story of Martha Carrier, there was smallpox. There was a smallpox outbreak in her family, and that just ruined her reputation.
Yeah. Obviously, you got smallpox because you did something evil.
Yeah.
So what do you think, Sarah? What are some of the scenarios that people said? Hi, April.
Hi, April.
What are some of the scenarios did you think caused all of this?
Okay.
There's a lot, but
there's a lot. There is, when you ask the question, what caused the Salem witch trials, there is no one answer. It is a very tangled, convoluted. I once heard somebody describe it as a game of Jenga, and all the pieces so intricately put together, and then any movement makes it sway and fall or keeps it up. So, in this environment of 1692, one of the big factors was, I talked about how at the time Danvers, Salem Village, and Salem Town were the frontier. 1692, the people of Salem Village and Salem Town were still living in the shadow of the King Philip's War, where there was absolute bloodshed between these people and the Native American population. The Native American population was fighting hard for their land, and the Puritans were fighting just as hard to take it from them. And you have to, as horrible as it is to say, these people saw the Native American population as agents of the devil. They look different. They act different. They don't follow our religion. So part of this, you have this paranoia of the Native American people coming out of the woods and taking your lives and destroying you and your families. So they equated them with the devil. And they were living in this constant state of fear of this. Because like I said, if something bad happens, it's because of the devil. They were very, very quick to draw this line. So we have this heavy stress of this constant wondering of, is somebody going to literally come out of the woods and destroy everything in our lives? We have one of the girls who was part of the accusers. She was a refugee from a battle in Maine where she witnessed her entire family being slaughtered in front of her. This type of horror was not unusual to the people living there at this time. You combine that with just the general hardship of living in this place at that time. There was no guarantee about anything when you lived there. There was no guarantee you were going to have food, that you were going to have firewood. I mean, you literally had death and doom as a potential at every corner. You have that piece. You combine that with the ever-present judging eye of God and that threat of Satan. So you have these things compounding each other. Like I said, there was zero economic stability. You have these people that there was very little common thread between people that was rooted in anything positive or good. And I say that, these were all very religious people. They were all members of these churches. But when you go into these churches and the message is fire and brimstone madness, it wasn't exactly a positive experience. There wasn't a lot of positivity for these people to kind of bond over. John, you had mentioned people and jealousy. There were a lot of feuds between these families in Salem town and Salem village. What's that?
Television.
You have no Real Housewives to watch. But no, I mean, there's resources. Everyone's going to be competitive, and yeah. So we have two of the names, the really, really big names in the Salem witch trials. We have the Putnams, and we have another family of the Porters. These two families were at each other's throats, and this is just one example of two families that were at each other's throats with arguing about property lines, different levels of conservative thinking and who should be allowed to belong to what church. There were issues going back to Samuel Parris, how I had mentioned that he was on the verge of getting booted out. So we have a lot of very, very strong opinions, all kind of fighting with each other. The Putnams were a big family, and we mentioned before, Ann Putnam Jr. was one of the main accusers. So there was a lot of headbutting and a lot of clashing on the human side that adds further to this pile of causes. We talked about Samuel Parris and the religious extremism that he pushed hard onto everybody that was living there. The two girls.
Didn't you?
What's that?
Didn't Bishop have the large amount of apple orchard?
Bridget Bishop did.
Yeah.
And that was something that people were not really okay with, because Bridget Bishop she was a woman and she owned land. This was not common in Salem, and the way that she got it was essentially through some legal loopholes through her husband that had passed on. So right then and there, that's a target on her back. I mentioned previously how she was accused of witchcraft twice before this. And she was also, when you look at when people were arrested and when they were brought to trial, it was not chronological at all. But Bridget Bishop was the first to be arrested. She was the first brought to trial. She was one of the first executed. My theory on that was because they needed somebody to go first who was the easy, believable target.
Right.
Bridget Bishop.
Right. And
right
how
there.
many acres did she have? A lot.
She had a lot. It was a sizable portion of land.
I don't know why, but 400 is in my head. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
I can't remember. I just know it was a sizable orchard. Yep. And it wasn't just land. It was an orchard. This was an asset at that time. So we have all of these, and now on top of that, at the time that this was going on, Salem was in a very murky place legally. The charter had been revoked from Salem. And when this was all going on, they were waiting for the governor to bring back a new charter. So while he's over in England, all of this is going on. So if you can imagine, you're the governor, you're the new governor, you come back. You come back to Massachusetts, you think you have this document that's now going to solidify this place as this shining example of civilization in the new world. And you get off this boat and you're like, hey, I got the charter. And somebody goes, that's great. Glad you're back. But the devil is here. Not only is the devil here, new governor in charge, the devil is here. We've got people that have already been executed. Sorry about that. We just kind of took that into our own hands. And we have jails full of people. Welcome back. You're in charge.
It's the
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So he kind of had to very, very quickly. He had to kind of figure out how to handle this. So he is the one that forms this court of Oyer and Terminer to hear and determine, and that is the group of people that went on to hear these trials. So we're just compounding thing after factor after factor after factor. Personally, I kind of touched on this before. I think one of the biggest factors was the human factor of how these people reacted. And these girls, these young girls, they did not stop. They could have stopped at any point up until the Rebecca Nurse trial. That was kind of the line in the sand of, okay, well, we can't go now and say we've been making this all up. My personal opinion is that this was entirely made up by them. And the reason I say that is because when we talk about the society that they were living in, these young girls, all of a sudden, they had power now. For the first time in their life, they were the powerful ones. Right. They were being listened to. They had the attention. They had these two towns in the palms of their hands. And I think that once it started, this was something that they found very difficult to give up, especially Ann Putnam.
Well, I mean, you also have to understand something. That whole thing for those children is that you were a child. Only speak when you're spoken to. And the girls were the ones that took care of the home. They're the ones that
gave them control.
They had the control to make or break someone or overheard a conversation that affected someone's parents.
See, I'm glad you mentioned that, because how, in my personal opinion, Ann Putnam was the worst of them. And when you talk about hearing people's conversations, the Putnams lived near the Paris household. The Putnams were a vicious family for a lot of reasons. You can get a real extensive story as to why the Putnams were awful. But you're living in these very close quarters. I don't believe for an instant that these girls were not overhearing conversations from the adults talking about, did you hear about that person? Oh, we don't like this person. That person is now a threat to my land. And these are the names that were coming out.
Right. I agree with you. There was also one other thing. I'm just going to say it, and then you could give the history of it. So when you're in Salem, they do tell you this as one of them, that they did make their yeast in large bulk, that they had in their barrels, and that they were out in all the weather of the snow, the rain, the heat, and they still utilized this and still ate it. Now leave a little of the red. Amen, sister. So they would do and make their yeast, and they had a bacteria that would grow in the yeast that they still ingested, that after a certain period of time it would be used or cause a hallucinogenic. So that was an idea or a thought as to one of the reasons why these girls did what they did, or the people in general.
There's a lot of things said about the Salem witch trials, and few of them make my blood boil as much as the ergot poisoning.
That's what I was going to say.
So, this whole theory of ergot poisoning, and this is something that people say on tours. This is something that is still taught in like college level history classes.
Yeah.
There is no basis to this ergot poisoning. The entire theory of ergot poisoning came from a study that was written by a woman in 1976, and it was published in a magazine. And when it first came out, it was actually debunked and refuted like within months from the scientific and historic community. But for whatever reason, it took off, and it has never let go. This is still something that people say, oh, well, and part of me wants to say or think that there is some root in it that they just don't want to admit that humans can be terrible. That humans did this to each other.
Absolutely.
It absolves people of their responsibility.
Oh, it was just the rye. It was just the bread.
But
no.
Also, it fuels another fear that's innate in all of us, because for thousands and thousands of years, we were finding food and making sure our food was not toxic. That's one of the biggest, an unspoken fear that many people have, is that they will be poisoned by their food because it can happen.
Yeah. And I mean, ergot was not something that was unknown to the people of Salem. Ergot was something that was used in medicinal purposes because they knew how to use it. Yeah. So this whole theory of, oh, well, they had some bad grain. There's just so many things that point against it. How is it then, if it was a certain supply of grain, these people, if they were to buy get their grain from the same place, why wasn't one family affected? Why was it only these two people in the same household that was eating from the same supply? There's so much. Right. But the ergot, I'm glad you brought it up, because I mean, if you go on Google today, you'll still find articles.
They still talk about it.
Yep, there's still people that are like, oh no, did you hear it was the bread? It's like, no, wasn't the bread, guys. It was a whole lot of different things, but it wasn't the bread.
How old were these girls?
They went from 9 to 17.
But you have to understand something. It's ignorant.
Going on there.
I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this because this is my own opinion. Ignorance is bliss, and and I agree with you and April and Sarah. There is no accountability for anybody's actions anymore. They can do whatever they want, and if they're wrong, no one says, "I'm wrong. We were wrong."
There actually was, during the trials, there was one judge who, while this was all kind of revving up, said that he was completely against this. He's not okay with it, and he actually stepped away. After the fact, another one of the judges, he was the only one who actually came forward for a day of, basically a day of apologizing and fasting, recognizing that we made a horrible, horrible mistake. There were other judges, though, that to their dying day felt, nope, we did the right thing here.
So they've all been exonerated, yes? Posthumously exonerated?
I believe so. One person who wasn't, she was accused. I don't recall if she actually had any prison time from her accusation. She was just absolved within the last couple of years. Very, very recently.
Just about maybe a year or two ago, the last one in Connecticut was finally exonerated.
Yeah.
It's just very sad that, history does repeat itself. It's sad that we don't learn from our mistakes and forward in a positive way. That if you're different because of religion or color or creed or height or weight or age, whatever it is, people in life have to stop pointing fingers and enjoy that person for who they are and not judge.
Yes,
Period.
I think we have the benefit of doing that now.
But
also think about that time period when everyone was so embedded with one another.
Okay.
They were so innately, they were dependent on one another.
What's the excuse now? People still do this.
I'm saying now it's ignorance. It's ignorance now, but I'm saying back then it was ignorance then. It was ignorance then too, absolutely. But
we can understand
you've got so much competition for such little resources and all of that stuff. And I'm not justifying. I don't mean it that way.
No.
But I'm saying like it's a totally different.
But why can't someone be happy that somebody has something? And that
because they only had a limited amount and they wanted it.
Like today, can't people be happy for people that?
I mean, you talk about how the wide range of people. Giles Corey. Giles Corey. He was the only person in American history that was pressed to death, and for some reason, there's a lot of twisted stories about Giles Corey. We have this tendency now to really romanticize this man. Giles Corey was a monster. And one of the things that was never really proven, but yeah, pretty much probably, Giles Corey had an extensive land ownership. He was a very, very successful man, and he at one point was accused of theft. There was no reason for it. So it was just it was a very warped kind of mindset back then.
It's almost like the house was Salem over there.
But I looked into, because all kidding aside, doing my ancestry stuff. Martha Carrier is a cousin on my dad's side of the family, and her actual conviction is now written as independence of mind and unsubmissive character.
Yeah.
That's what she was killed for.
Mm.
Yeah.
She would not submit.
Yeah.
And she had an independent mind.
Yep. She had an independent mind. Rebecca Nurse, she was first found not guilty in the court. When she was answering questions, she was elderly. She was in her 70s. She had some health issues. She was mostly deaf. And when they were asking her these questions and she didn't answer, they took that as that's the devil's work. So she was essentially sentenced to death because she couldn't hear. And the thing that really, like I said, originally she was found not guilty. And what happened was she was being questioned, and they brought in another prisoner. I believe it was Deliverance Hobbs, to ask her questions. And when Rebecca Nurse said, "She's one of us," though, she was referring to it as they were both prisoners. The court took that as, oh, she just identified her as a witch. So they reversed the verdict on Rebecca Nurse. Mm. So we have Martha Carrier, who was an independent thinker. We have Rebecca Nurse, who
were imprisoned with her to try to change her mind.
Yeah. Yep. I mentioned the one woman. She wore a silk scarf. Uh-oh.
Was it before or after Labor Day?
Mm.
And Bridget Bishop, who had been previously accused twice. Both of those times were very, very heavily influenced because she was so outspoken.
So, real fast question.
Yeah.
And then we can end this so we can make sure that we do this, because it could be enough.
We could go on and on and on about Salem and its history.
So you guys know, next week we are talking about the hauntings throughout the town of Salem, Massachusetts. That's our second part to this.
We talked about what kind of energy is in the city now.
Right.
There's a lot.
So, do you believe that when we move on to a different plateau, that everything we've always discussed, like who killed Liz, the Lizzie Borden thing,
Lizzie,
yeah. So, and then like this whole thing, like all like the Egyptians who moved those big stones, were they visited by? Do you think that we get all this info like when we?
This is like the second time you've asked this question.
But I want to hear it again. Do you believe that? Like, are we going to know everything we've ever wanted to know when we move on to our next?
When we leave here?
Yes.
I believe we would have the option.
Oh, okay, good.
John wants to know. He wants like the hall. What do we call it? It's gonna be the hallway of all John's revelations.
That's it. Got a glass of wine. Going, I knew it.
Say,
knew
yep.
I'll be standing right next to you when they tell you that Lizzie did it.
We'll come down and visit and go. Anyway, I think that's I think that people don't realize if you have never been there, go enjoy it. It's wonderful.
Go.
It is a real, there are so many dimensions and levels to this. There's an extensive history to it that you can embrace and enjoy and understand.
And I mean, Salem really is, and the city has been working very, very hard to make it a year-round destination.
Correct.
And a lot of these things, these tours, the access to information about the trials, and all of the other history, because Salem, there is so much more to Salem's history other than the witch trials, but it's accessible year-round.
Correct.
So, absolutely.
Don't go when there's 40,000 people there in a day.
You could go in January. You could go in April. You could go in June. It's just there's different things to do at different times.
All the time. There's so much.
The Wheel of the Year.
The Wheel of the Year. Go to the museum. There's wonderful stores throughout that whole town, and everybody really is very. They're wonderful, and they're really embracing, and they love to be asked questions. And I just think it's just, although it's got this embedded dark history, it's still enchanting and beautiful.
It is.
At the same time.
Very much so.
And it's very welcoming, at least to me and Sarah. It's like maybe we were there in past lives, and maybe we were really a part of.
Were you Martha?
Maybe. I had to have been the
a lot.
I'd have to be the richest one there, so
that would not have been Martha.
Yeah. I know. But I just enjoy it so much. Go visit. I mean, even in November, December, they put on a ball at the Hawthorne.
They do in December. They have the Christmas house tours now, and it's amazing.
Beautiful. It's only it's a short time. It's a gorgeous drive. Now it's like everything is beautiful. Sarah's going in November, and I just came back, and I'm already jealous that she's going. I go with her. I'm going to sit in the back seat.
Okay.
You'll yell at people.
I'm a backseat driver. I better have a window. But yes. So next week we are going to talk about the hauntings throughout the town. So I think it's going to be awesome.
It's going to be great.
We're trying to make sure that this is something. Just so you know, throughout this whole thing, we've been getting black screened glitches.
Yeah.
Ever since the first time Salem.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just does this blink, like the whole thing is blinking.
Oh.
Weird. And April texted Genevieve and said there was a spirit that has been behind us doing a figure 8.
So we'll have to look
check back at
see.
that. But we welcome them.
It's either mine or Genevieve's descendants all just hanging out.
If you bring back a ghost,
or ancestors, you know what I mean?
If you bring back a ghost, we
have
to have an intro.
It just got pinched.
We have to have an introductory period. Like one of them has to go in the bathroom and you introduce, like when you bring a cat home.
Well, anyway,
let them smell each other under the door.
So thank you guys for watching. We appreciate this. We get a chance to do some really fun stuff, and it's because of you.
Yes.
So thank you. And we'll see you next week on part 2 of Salem, Massachusetts.
Halloween week. Come see us.
Yes, we're going to be here. I'm going to be here. So we're all going to be here.
We're all going to be here.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks, you.
Sarah. Thank
see
you so
you next
much.
week, guys.
Thank you.
Happy Halloween.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy Samhain.
Yes.